Yo, it's Dev. Sorry I missed last week. I tried to take a week off after the Australian run. How successfully that turned out is debatable. I think it was good though. I have a tendency to think too much, and without the work and all that to distract me, my mind tends to go down these avenues that are uh, I mean, I can rationalize it and think that it's part of the work on some level, but ultimately it's just, neurotic. But I'm back at it now, and so hope you're doing well. So the whole idea of these updates is to give an insider's insight into the process that has yielded all these albums since the beginning. And as I'm entering the next phase of my life and work, the idea is to sort of give an idea of what the narrative is, so that when the records are finally released, the reasons why they end up being the way that they are is more clear. So it's less just like abstract work and more just this is the process, and the process is ultimately the most important thing to me. So I make notes, and I think it's important for me to also be clear about the fact that it's weird to do these updates because clearly I'm insecure and have been since the very beginning, and to let people in on the process underlines how ridiculous so much of it is. But this brings me to the first point of this. I think you have to be brave in order to rationalize doing what you want to do versus what you've become good at. But conversely, I think what that requires is that you have to figure out what you want to do from moment to moment. If you're a painter, you're going to have a subject, or a filmmaker, you can have a subject that you're going to focus on. But until you find something compelling enough that you want to focus on, the whole process becomes trying to identify what it is that is compelling. And sometimes that's easier than others, like in the past, certain periods of my life and my work has been very clear to me because the subjects are so overt. Someone died, or someone was born, as I've said before. And you're like, well, that's clearly what this is about. But the moth is fundamentally about change. And the bravery, no matter what medium you're engaged in, comes from being able to say, okay, well, really, what I'm into right now is this. How do I define that? And in hindsight, it's often, what's the quote, plain as balls on a tall dog. You're like, oh, of course that's what it was. How could I have not seen that at the time? But I just don't. I never do. I never do until I'm in it. But it's like clues, right? Like, it's about change, obviously, because a moth, caterpillar to a butterfly or to a moth or whatever, there's a transformation there. And so figuring out what the aesthetic is becomes this really strange process of being able to say, okay, well, what do you like right now? What do you want to hear? What is it that you want it to be? What interests you? What's in your world that is fascinating? So for that week that I took off, I went to Japan. I spent lots of time in Japan when I was younger, and I went there just to sort of I was in Australia. It was straight up, much longer flight than I expected. And I thought, well, I wonder what it would be like just to spend some time there. And on the tail end of the Australian run, it was just so overwhelming that certain things that I've been writing, because I think I said on the last update, I went on tour with 90 or so demo ideas, and man, I didn't like any of them. Maybe there was two I liked. And it's not that the ideas weren't reasonably cool, it's just that none of them seemed to make any sense. It seemed like, yeah, this one's chaotic, this one's abstract, but it had this overwhelming sense through all the demos of just bland. It was just all bland. And I think when I got to Japan and I finally was able to take my foot off the gas from the touring, it was clearer to me why it was bland. It's like, man, it's the same reason I was working on Dream Piece. It's like the stimulus has been so much that you're overwhelmed, and you have been for a long time. It's like a nervous breakdown is imminent unless you kind of pull back. And so, of course, those ideas are going to be dull, just because you don't have that energy, right? However, the two ideas that I did like didn't make sense to me until I was in Japan. And this is why I say, going back to being brave about what it is that you want to do. Prior to being in Japan, I was like, man, these ideas they're not songs, they're just these structures. It's part and apart and apart and apart and apart and apart, and there's no cohesion between it. But once I was there, I realized that a big part of what my interests are at this point is I like worlds within worlds. I like the microscopic parts of sound to be such that wherever you look, it's really detailed. Wherever you listen, it's really detailed. So I came back to the studio, and I've been installing Atmos gear, which is, man, it's a whole new thing. We got to think about calibration and the axis from where the listening position is, and how do you work within your DAW and then objects. It's like a whole new learning curve. But the thing about it that's really cool is it lends credence to the idea that perhaps part of my interests right now are the worlds within the worlds. And what better way to do that than immersive audio, where wherever you listen, there's like structures that are complete. When I was working on the Puzzle or Empath, the last two records that were really, like, I had a focus. Lightwork was different than that. It was cool, but it was different than that. But both those records, I think that there were hints of that I had been experimenting with, but they were really messy. Like, at the time, the idea of those really microscopic worlds within the puzzle were just, it was a mess. It's just dirty and a lot of like grit, and that's not where I'm at now. Now it's like, well, how do you fine tune that aesthetic so it's not dirty? But unlike Empath, where it was really, tightly wound, it's about trying to find space and the headroom for all these things, but make them really clear. And so Atmos seems to be a part of the Moth. However, the thing that I also started recognizing while I was listening to these demos is there's not enough songs. It's part after part after part after part, and aesthetic after aesthetic, and vibe after vibe after vibe, but it's not saying anything. It's just little monuments. So what I chose to do is, because when I was in Japan, it struck me as, it was almost like a reminder, because Tokyo in itself is like that. It's endless. It's the biggest city in the world. It's endless, but there's structure to it, It's like you go down an alley and it's just endless shops, endless restaurants, endless people. And then you look down another direction and there's another endless stream. But unlike places maybe like India or any place that's got that same kind of population density. Japan is just super organized, so it's like frenetic energy wherever you go, and illuminated. There's just lights everywhere. And frankly, it was too much after the Australian run. I was just like, man, it's too much. But amidst the too much, there were 2 songs in my demos that I was like, oh, that's what that's missing. That's what that's missing. It's missing the cohesion, so it needs to be more of a song. But it's the structure. It can be worlds within worlds, but it has to be structured so that it doesn't become overwhelming. And the thing that makes it not overwhelming is the cohesion of the song. So in a sense, as opposed to abstract song structures, how can you take that aesthetic and then apply it to something that you don't have to process in the same way? If the music is constantly abstract, then unless you're just able to surrender to it, which I think was the point with the puzzle, is like you have to surrender to it because it doesn't make sense. And then by surrendering, it made sense to me. Conversely with this, I don't want to expend the energy while listening to something, trying to figure out the structure. So pulling that back a little bit and saying, okay, well, what are the primary focal points in this structure, in this song, in this piece? And then let's extrapolate that and make it something that's more familiar. But within the same framework, don't lose sight of the fact that what interests you, going back to the bravery of it, is the worlds within the worlds. It's not, it's what was the other note that I had here about this? There's so many, man, I had so many notes this time. God, what are some of self-transformation is a kind of alchemy in the spirit of the face of inevitable suffering. Best advice is to write what you like, but I tend to struggle to identify what I like. What is it about? It's, as an artist, I'm young, naive, not particularly educated, but the process of learning, now that you've seen things, makes things overwhelming. What was it from the movie The Little Prince? To become spring means accepting the risk of winter. To become presence means accepting the risk of absence. The creative act is in an absurd reality is the attempt to articulate deeper concepts by putting the search for meaning in the hands of the individual. The excitement and rapid need for stimulation results in fervid restlessness that throws us into the arms of an illusion that we mistake for happiness. I read that somewhere. The pace of society, hustle culture, technology, etc. So you don't force it. That was the point. I've been forcing it because I'm afraid of it. I'm afraid of not being able to write something that will sustain my life. And so the fear is, well, if you follow where you're at, if you follow the abstract ways in which your individual life has manifested, the fear is, well, no one's going to like it. No one's going to like it, man. But that's the crux of it. That's the crux of it. That's the fear that needs to be faced. It's like, because in absence of doing what you like, or where you're at, tackle the internal dialogue about who you are artistically and what you need to do. Do what you have strength to do. Okay, do you have the strength to do what is appropriate for your current state rather than second guessing and producing tripe to placate people, because you're good at doing tripe. You're good at doing the things that up to this point you've been identified with. So the temptation is just to do that, But if you do that, then it's too much work, man. And the interesting part about the process is how I believe on the surface, and I can totally understand how it would come across that way, it's complete self-absorption. Yet your understanding of yourself allows you to represent things that other people will be able to participate in, because you're not it's funny because you say, okay, well, you're not special or you're not different, and which is true, yet we're all special and we're all different. So the seeming self-absorption of the process is about finding out what makes you unique, so that when you present your vision to the world, it's something that only you can do. And that's not just me that participates in this. It's like when you start as an artist or as a musician, and I do the same, it's like you copy things that you like. It's like, oh, I love that, I want to do that. Maybe that's who I am. Maybe my identity is this, or these are the clothes I wear. But everybody has their own unique voice, and to be able to discover that requires self-analysis. There's no way around it. And part of the bravery as well is not listening when people say, oh, you're a narcissist for doing this. You're a narcissist for being so absorbed in your process and yourself that it becomes your whole world. Because it's not me that's my whole world when it comes to writing, but the source of being able to discover sound comes from being able to see where you're and I am at. And some people are more adept at navigating that or seeing it in the moment. I've got a friend who, when he's angry, can articulate that anger in a very rational way. And when I get upset, everything goes away. Like I can't think. Like if I'm angry, I'm like, ah. And when people say, oh, you should have spoken earlier, before, and I was like, man, if I spoke earlier, I wouldn't have known what it was I was angry about. I have to process it before, and that's just me, right? Like my buddy's in the moment. He's like, I'm angry about this. I'm angry because you did this, blah, 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 or I'm sad or whatever. But for me, I'm like, I don't know what it is yet. I don't know what it is. It takes me a while. I used to think it was getting better. I used to think it was shorter. But it isn't. It's just it takes the time it's going to take, and that's all there is. So I'll be back next Sunday. And those two songs that on the demos I thought had potential out of 90. What I've chosen to do is finish setting up the Atmos room and forget about music. Like that's it. Like I'm not going to think about it. I only play ambient stuff. I'm only doing the Dream Piece stuff, you know what I mean, in the morning, like I do. I've got 3 or 4 of those in the pipe, but I think the thing I need to do is let it go and focus on something else for a while, because it's the pressure of forcing it. If you let things evolve in its own time, it becomes super obvious. And I know this. It becomes super obvious when you're writing. You're like, oh, of course that's it. Yeah, of course that song's cool. Of course that part's good. But I get so wound up in I have to do it, I have to produce, maybe it's this, maybe it's that when I write it, there's nothing. You don't see it. So I'm taking the next while just to set up the Atmos stuff, because it's a lot of learning. Do the updates, do the Dream Piece stuff in the morning. And then when I start again, I think a lot of the confusion I had about the ideas will have turned into a much clearer path, because I know there's a ton of ideas within those ideas that work and are part of the Moth. But because I'm so busy trying to make it something as opposed to let it be what it is, those things aren't I can't see them, right? Again, this level of neurotic focus on what I do, this isn't something that's new. This has been since the beginning, since very beginning, before Ocean Machine, before City, before any of that. It's always been this. So the process is, again, maybe the Moth includes letting people into the process. Maybe that's part of it as well. Who knows? It's fun, man. It's weird, but it's fun. I'll see you next Sunday. Hope you're doing well. Talk to you.